so it's funny because also when you go to bed, it's like one time he laughed to hear it. It's just like crazy. It's like, what is that? Yes. It's your bed.
Gentlemen and ladies, good evening. Welcome to Credit and Coinage. I'm Cash Arehart. I am the supervisor of the Capitol building at the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation. I've been with Colonial Williamsburg since 2001. Served in several different capacities. Started off working in one of the shops in town, in one of the retail stores. Was there for about 6 months. Transferred over to the group services department. Did school group tours for about 4 years. Transferred into the first person interpretation program. Did that for about 6 years. Portrayed a lot of different characters. Thomas Nelson Jr., a guy named Joshua Hardcastle who almost got tarred and feathered at the beginning of the Revolution. The Reverend James Madison, the first bishop of the Church of Virginia, what eventually will become the Episcopalian Church. So a pretty wide spread of characters. Transferred over into our Education Outreach Department and spent 4 years there working on our Emmy Award-winning electronic field trip series. Was responsible for a program entitled The Global Economy, which talked about the economy of the 18th century and the Transatlantic and truly global trade network that Virginia was a part of. And now I'm back at Colonial Williamsburg after a couple of years up at the University of Virginia with the Sorensen Institute for Political Leadership. I thought that the history of our past was a little less trying than the politics of our present. So back to Williamsburg I went. My thanks to the George Washington Foundation for the invitation to come and speak here. My wife Kelly is the manager of interpretation there at Kenmore and Ferry Farm. So thank you for having me been voluntold that I was going to get to do the presentation this evening. Credit and Coinage, the economy of Colonial Virginia. If at any time anybody has any questions about anything they see in the program, please do not hesitate to ask. If I don't have the correct answer for you, I will find someone who does, or I'll make something up, whichever you prefer. If we're going to talk about the economy of Colonial Virginia, I think an excellent example to use for that discussion will be our very own Fielding Lewis, a merchant of some repute here in Fredericksburg, very successful merchant, had a shop just down the street here, and several ships of his own as well, engaged in, as I mentioned, not only a transatlantic economy, but a facet of a global economy of the 18th century, just as sophisticated and complex as one might assume our economy of the 21st century would be. To talk about the economy, because it's such a huge topic, can everybody hear me all right? I have a microphone up here available, but I don't have any 20-something screaming fourth graders out in the audience, so I felt safe this evening. To talk about the economy of Colonial Virginia, I thought a good way to frame that would be in the idea of what would Fielding Lewis teach an apprentice? What would he have to educate someone, a child around the age of 12 or so, that would be apprenticed to him until the age of 21, and all of the skills that that person would need to learn to be successful in business. A great place to start with an apprenticeship, I think, is to talk about the contract, because it is a legal binding contract that one would enter into. I have the text of one here. I hate it when somebody puts up a screen on a PowerPoint that is just a block of text. I dread it, I really do. So we're going to go back to Fielding, and I'll kind of explain what was in some of that block of text. Witnesseth that John Stevens, soon to be the apprentice, with the consent of his mother and Stevens, puts himself into an apprenticeship to George Charlton to learn the trade, art, and mystery of being a tailor. He has to serve him as an apprentice until he turns 21. During that time, he must faithfully serve his master, keep his secrets, and obey all of his lawful commands. He shall not contract matrimony during the term of his apprenticeship, nor shall he haunt ordinaries or taverns, or make himself drunk, nor absent himself from his master's service day or night unlawfully. In return, George Charlton, the master of the tailor shop, has to, by his best means available, teach and instruct the apprentice, and promise to provide good and sufficient meat, drink, washing, lodging, and clothing during the said term, and teach him to read and write. And at the expiration of that contract, George Charlton is obliged to pay the apprentice what the law allows to be able to set up his apprentice in business for himself moving forward. And then this contract was signed in the court in the city of Williamsburg on the 5th day of September, 1748. That's a pretty standard contract for an apprentice starting out with a new master or a mistress. You might have a young lady that would be apprenticed to learn the trade of millinery or mantua making or wig making, any of those other trades that were very common among women of the period as well. So getting back in, you can see what this awful block of text was here. And then moving past that, one of the first lessons an apprentice is going to be taught by Fielding Lewis is just the basics of the economy. You know, I learned that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the DNA, but they didn't teach me how to file my taxes in school. Fielding Lewis would teach you how to do your taxes. He would teach you how to keep your accounts books and manage all of your credits and your debits as well. One of the basic lessons of that is just the structure of the economic system of colonial America. It mirrors the mother country in England: pounds, shillings, and pence. There are 12 pence to 1 shilling, and there are 20 shillings to 1 pound. And when I say pence, that means a penny. The symbols for pound sterling, the L, the shilling, the S, the pence, the D, and a farthing, Q. Why? Why is that? It makes no sense from a modern perspective. But if we consider the Romans, because that is how far back this goes, can anybody tell me what the word pound is in Latin? Well, this is something else you would have learned as an apprentice. You'd get enough Greek and Latin to get by in life. Libre, or L-I-B-R-A-E. Libre for pound, or L. The idea that it would take 240 pennies to make 1 pound. 240 pennies of money of the currency at the time when the Franks are responsible for adopting this terminology that we use still. They come up with 240 pennies make a pound, so pound L with that horizontal hash line through it. Shilling S, pence D, D for denarii, and then farthing Q. That's actually a more recent innovation, a quarter of a penny, or a farthing, or a fourth of a penny. So pound, shilling, pence, and farthing. Fielding would go ahead and teach an apprentice the rudiments of keeping an accounts book. As you see here in what is graciously referred to by the George Washington Foundation as Ledger Book 0, this is an entry from George Washington's first accounts book that he ever kept. I pulled this from the Lives and Legacies blog. You have the address here. There are a lot of great entries and information posted by the museum available to the public online if you wanted to go and explore this more on your own at your convenience. Most accounts books and ledgers that you see from the 18th century are going to follow this basic format that young George Washington set up in 1748. Under the left side of the page, you would have DR, or debtor, And then on the right side of the page, CR for creditor. Expenses and revenues. So to cash paid Mr. Mitchell for, and then it's a dancing lesson, here's money paid for a glass ring, and then cash for the music master coming in. And then his income, where he is being paid back by his mother, Mary, to cash received in full, 1 shilling. And these 3 columns here, these are also standard, pounds, shillings, and pence. So here he says, to 1 doubloon, 6 shillings, 7 pence. To 1 DO, that means ditto, one of the same, so in this case it would be the doubloon above it. Again, 5 shillings, 6 pence. And then 1 pisterine, which is another type of coin of the period. We also have some accounts books from later on. Betty Washington Lewis, some accounts that she had in the 1790s and 1791. Again, a more sophisticated keeping. This wasn't being done by young George Washington here, but rather an adult merchant. All of these different purchases, you see in this nearer column, month, and then the date, and then the item or transaction, either a service or a commodity that is exchanging hands. The individual cost, and then the cumulative cost. Every so often you'll see in this far column, they would tally up a subtotal. Usually that happens at the end of a year or when they're transitioning all of their records to a new ledger or new accounts book. So it's just a way of kind of subtotaling everything and then moving it into another book for continued use. You wouldn't have everything live in just one set of books, though. Most accomplished merchants, anyone that is going to be successful at business, they keep a series of 3 different types of books. The first that you see here, they would keep what would be called a waste book. It's just a very small, often paste book. It has kind of a cardboard cover. It doesn't have any lines on the pages. And this is where a merchant would record all of their transactions. Everything that comes in and out of the store, it all gets very quickly tucked into this small book that he could keep, or that she could keep on her person throughout the day. And it doesn't have that neat and orderly structure that we saw on the ledger page previously. It's much more haphazard. At the end of the day, the master or mistress of the shop is going to go through their waste book, and it's called the waste book because eventually this is just going to get thrown out. Very few of these waste books survive from the period because they were intended to be disposable. All of the transactions from the waste book would get transferred to what they called a day book. The day book would have all of those transactions tallied up. So here you see this is for a wheelwright. February 2nd, he has this work. Then he doesn't have much, and then on the 14th he has 3 more entries, 1, 2, 3. And then the totals here. And then you would have the name for each person. So there's Nathan Miller, Abraham Edward, Paul Guff. Into the day book they go. The day book, it's a better construction quality than the waste book. It might have a cardboard cover of thicker weight. It probably is not going to be bound in leather, though, like you would see in the ledger. And as far as examples of ledgers go, this one, it's got all the, on Antiques Roadshow, they would say it has all the bells and whistles. It's in a clear, legible hand. It matches up very orderly. Everything is very well recorded. This is a book that is attributed to William Nelson of Yorktown, a very wealthy merchant. He served as the interim governor or acting governor of Virginia in the early 1770s. When he passed away, he left his son, Thomas Nelson Jr., 40,000 pounds cash. This is a staggering amount of money for the period. A tradesman working here in Fredericksburg in 1772 might earn 30 or 40 pounds in a year. And Thomas Nelson Jr. left 40,000 pounds cash to his son. So an incredibly successful merchant for the period. Looking at William Nelson's ledger here, you've got the name of different customers. Some ledgers, the entire page would just have one person's name at the top and then all of their entries filtering down over the course of time. So you can see here 1770, March 19, May 5, July 18, and so forth. Robert Carter Nicholas Esquire, treasurer of the Colony of Virginia at the time. It's not going to be any problem for him to come in and rack up 611 pounds on the accounts. And then to come in later on, again you see contra or corresponding credits to the debits of Robert Carter Nicholas. And here he has paid off 482 pounds in one sitting, thanks to this bill of exchange. And then again, down here, the estate of Carter Burrell, Colonel Carter Burrell. If anyone ever visited Carter's Grove, back down on the James River, an old plantation house that used to be owned by Colonial Williamsburg, this is that Carter Burrell. And again, over here, eventually a balance of 111 pounds. Those are not small sums of money that are being carried by some of these merchants. Again, they're not only going to be used for external transactions, but internally as well. This is from the ledger of a merchant named William Ramsay in Alexandria. Just like Fielding Lewis here in Fredericksburg, William Ramsay had a merchant's shop and several ships that he owned as well. Here, he is recording his expenses for outfitting his own ship, the brigantine Fairfax. We don't have that many of Fielding Lewis's original records. We have a good number. As far as I'm aware, we don't have one of his ledger pages where he's outfitting his own ships. One has to assume, though, that this existed in the accounts of Fielding Lewis here in Fredericksburg, where he's recording purchases of bricks of tea to go into the ship, sailing twine, cheeses, there's some more tea. It must be before the tea party happened. There's hammers in here as well and other equipment. All of these being tallied up again, pounds, shillings, pence, for a grand total over the course of 1753 in August to February of 1754, 6 pounds, 5 shillings, and 10 pence of different material that he's putting into his ship. He has to record that. That's income being spent. That's expenses going out somewhere, so he's trying to keep his books balanced. And when we talk about revenue and expenses, today, essentially, we have really two, but kind of three systems of currency. We've got cold, hard cash. You know, everybody loves it. It was the only thing that Waffle House took until a couple of years ago. And then they finally caved in and they started to accept credit cards also. And now we are beginning to see the advent of more and more digital currencies. Bitcoin, Apple Pay, just being able to use your phone and go up to a register and sign that way and walk out the store with your purchase. Fielding really had 4 different currencies or forms of economic transactions that he would accept in business. You had, again, it's universally accepted, it's always the right size and color, cold, hard cash. In this case, the Spanish silver dollar or milled dollar. You had paper treasury notes. These would be printed by the colonial government and could be used in circulation after the French and Indian War. Before that time, in Virginia, if you had a paper that you were going to use to try to pay an expense for something, it was probably a tobacco note. So tobacco would be the 3rd form of currency used here in Virginia. And then 4thly, we still have it today, it's just plastic. This would be your credit of the 18th century. So cashew money, tobacco, paper money, and credit are your four major mediums of economic transactions for the period. Each one has its own particular set of rules and procedures that you have to follow when handling that currency. We'll get into everybody's favorite first, which would be regular hard money, or what they might refer to as specie, S-P-E-C-I-E, specie, gold and silver. These are coins that might be printed, or minted, I should say, minted all over the globe. In Diderot's Encyclopedia from 1768, you have French coins, Spanish coins, English crowns. This is the Spanish milled dollar. Down here you have the French Concordia. Again, these smaller coins, they might be coins of gold, such as the English guinea, or a better example of it here. The English guinea, this is a small gold coin minted by the English that would have a value, a face value of 21 shillings, or 1 pound and 1 shilling. You have here the English half crown, and then here you have the Spanish milled dollar. Of these three, which one do you think is the most commonly circulated coin in Virginia during the years before the American Revolution?
Spanish dollar.
Spanish, absolutely. The Spanish milled dollar. Why is that?
Florida.
Not just Florida, but farther south. Where did the Spanish set up all of these colonies back in the 1500s? Central and South America. So they have been pulling mountains of silver out of Central and South America for centuries by the 1770s. So they have a surplus of gold and silver that they can circulate into the global economy. I have a replica of a Spanish milled dollar. I also have a replica of the English half crown, which, interestingly enough, has the same dimensions and weight as the Spanish milled dollar. You think they're trying to compete. We'll pass those around. You all are welcome to examine those. It's these Spanish coins we see a lot of in colonial America. This is for another reason, not only because Spain has a glut of gold and silver. If anybody ever had too much money in life, it's not me, I know that, but it might have been Spain at the time. Also, England, as part of their navigation acts, they have a policy that they are not going to send gold or silver coinage from the mother country to the colonies. That's not the way the system works. It's supposed to be our job to send gold and silver to them. But of course, we don't have any gold or silver to speak of in Virginia. So instead, we're sending all of these raw materials, all of our natural resources, iron, tobacco, linen, grains, foodstuffs, back to the mother country. What we don't send back to the mother country, perhaps we can sell the surplus to Spanish or the French down in the Sugar Islands, down in the Central and South Americas. And that's how we're able to get some of that specie, some of that hard currency into the economy here in Virginia. You know, everybody's seen the bit in the cartoons where, oh, let me see if this coin is real, and they bite down into it. You would run out of teeth before you ran out of coins. The joke is that's how George Washington wound up with these teeth. He bit into too many coins, apparently. And these are a set of Washington's dentures on display up at Mount Vernon. This is the noted historian SpongeBob SquarePants. So you wouldn't bite into a coin, but what is it that they're trying to determine with that idea? Where does that notion come from, that trope of trying to figure out whether or not the coin is genuine?
Purity.
The purity. You're looking to try to figure out what it's made of. For our money today, specifically our cash, coins and dollar bills, it doesn't matter so much what it is made out of, so much as what it is printed onto the face of those coins and those bills. It's quite contrary for the 18th century. Instead, it's the intrinsic value. It's what that coin is made of that will give it its value. If I come up to you and I give you a pound of gold dust, are you going to tell me to hit the bricks, or are we going to do business? We're going to do business. That gold dust, even though it's dust, it has intrinsic value. It's worth something because of what it's made of. Which is why we could take our Spanish milled dollars and cut them into quarters, or just mangle them in all sorts of other ways, and they will still be accepted in an economic transaction. If you've ever heard the saying, so here's the dollar, and this is the reason that when America declares independence, eventually by the 1790s, our economy is based off of the dollar and not the pound, because we had more of these Spanish milled dollars in circulation in America at the time. And it's a soft transition over the course of many decades. When George Washington takes command of the army outside of Boston in 1775, the very first transaction that he lists in his ledger on that military campaign is for $333.33 paid for a spy to go into Boston and get some information. But he's recording that transaction in dollars, not in pounds sterling, shillings, and pence. So you could take these dollars, and because we need a little more liquidity, we need some greater flexibility in our economy. If I go into your shop and I want to buy some goods from you, but they're only worth about half of this dollar, we can still do business. You might take out a hammer and a chisel and whack that dollar right in half, and I'd be able to walk away with a $0.50. You could do it again and I'd walk away with a $0.25. That's why we call our 25-cent pieces quarter. 25%, 1/4 of a dollar. Or down here, eighths of a dollar. The Spanish word for an eighth, or real, and also referred to as bits. 2 bits, 4 bits, 6 bits, a dollar. But if the coins are worth something because of their intrinsic value, if I were a deceitful person, and I'm not, and I took a steel blade along the edge of one of these coins and removed some of the precious metal, that coin would now be worth less than it had been originally. If I do that to enough coins that come through my hands, I might wind up with enough gold or silver, I could make my own coins if I wanted to. The minters of coins, they started to catch on to this because, they would like for you to be able to accept your money at face value. We do today, because we took the intrinsic value out of our economic system. In the 18th century, though, someone who is not very well experienced handling money, they might think, oh, it looks like it's a whole coin. Sure, we'll do business. That's why they started putting these milling marks on the edges of the coins, or along the rim of the coin here on the English guinea, that gold coin again, or even on the English half crown. They begin stamping letters into the edge. So even a blind person would be able to tell, oh, this is a crown that's at face value. Or this crown or half crown has been clipped or shaved on its edge to remove some of the precious metals. So that coin isn't going to be as worth as much as its face value would have been originally. Even today, our coins still have reading, is the modern name for it. Those edges, if you feel along the edge of a dime or a quarter, those ridges are there because of their historic ancestry, but also today for the visually impaired, it's easy for someone who is hard of sight to tell the difference between a dime and a penny. The dime has reading on it, the penny does not. Dealing with all of these coins that have been cut, clipped, maybe in the form of dust, you're going to have to determine their weight somehow. And that is going to be accomplished through a set of balance and weights, just like this. If you think your balance and weights aren't accurate, or you think somebody else's they're trying to cheat you, you can go to the local courthouse. Every county court in Virginia would have its own set of balance and weights that have been calibrated to the set that is kept down in the Secretary of the Colony's office down in Williamsburg. And you could test somebody's weights. And if they're swindling you, they're going to be in a heap of trouble in court. The system of weights that they're using, 24 grains penny weight, 20 penny weight to the troy ounce, that's more detail than even that slide needed to be for our purposes. But you can have these small cases of weights that you could travel with to conduct business. Somebody pasted the chart here in the back for the different forms of weight and different coins at their face value. There's another set of weights. What I really was intrigued about is this up here. I don't know what this transaction is, but it is serious taking place in that image between this fellow and his banyan and a skeleton. Once you have determined the weight of a coin, then you could look up in your handy almanac, which are printed each year, the value of the gold or silver that you have in the grains, penny weight, and troy ounces here. So 1 ounce of gold is worth 5 pounds. Very straightforward, very simple. Down here at the bottom is a handy chart to show you the face value of all of those different coins I was talking about earlier. The Johannes's, the Carolines, the ducats, Arabian shekins, other gold coins. You know, they're going to come from all over the world. The exchange rates are set at a place called the Exchange, and really it's an intersection between the Capitol building and a coffee house down in Williamsburg. Quarterly throughout the year, merchants from all over Virginia would travel to Williamsburg. They'd all get together in what we would think of as a stock exchange. They'd say, well, you know, how's the economy doing this year? Oh, it's pretty good. Well, this is where we'll set our money then. Each colony is doing that, though. So you're winding up with a set of prices for not just pound sterling, what it would be in England, but New York, Connecticut, Philadelphia, Quebec. So an English crown is supposed to be 5 shillings face value. In New York, it's worth 8 shillings 9 pence. In Philadelphia, it's worth 6 shillings 8 pence. That's called inflation. Even today, the dollar is worth more in different countries around the globe. It's the same principle. Some places the economy is doing better than it is others, so that one coin would be worth more. It has a greater buying power in one location than it does in another. A system just as sophisticated as ours today. So leaving coinage behind, we move into paper money. Part of the problem with paper money, though, is it is much easier to counterfeit, and also it's a lot easier to have chicanery happen with it. This is the former Speaker and Treasurer of the Colony of Virginia, John Robinson. Just before he died, he started circulating, as part of an economic stimulus package, some Treasury Notes that had been coming into Virginia and back out again that should have been destroyed. But like I said, the trouble is, he died. So all of a sudden now, we don't know which money belongs to Virginia and which money belongs to John Robinson. It becomes a huge mess that takes decades to straighten out. So Virginia starts tightening up on their paper money. They add in new anti-counterfeiting techniques. Along the edge here, there's all of this fancy engraving where it was printed, and then they just took a razor and they cut it out of a book, like you would see a book of raffle tickets, so that when this note could be taken out, circulated around, used as money, and then eventually it would be turned back into the treasurer's office down in Williamsburg, and you would get cold hard cash in exchange for it, and this note should be destroyed. What they could do is try to match up this edge with that stub that would be kept in the records down in Williamsburg. They also started printing other notes, 3 pounds here, or dollar note after the war begins in May of 1776. Later on in the war in 1781, $200 on one note. Death to counterfeit. Counterfeiting is a felony. You will hang for it if you are found guilty. Here's a series again of these notes that are printed shortly after the Revolution begins. They look the same on the surface. This one's $4, $5, $6, $15. You have to pay very close attention if you do not want to be swindled. Just quickly, I'll point out also, this is Virtus. If you look on the seal, the lesser seal of the Commonwealth of Virginia on our state flag, this is that scene. So Virtus triumphant over tyranny, except she looks like she's still ready for a fight. Her sword is drawn, the spear tip is out, she is completely bare-chested, she will take anyone on. Bring it, King George. Leaving paper money behind, getting into what makes Virginia's economy so great in the 18th century. Principally, it's this stuff right here. And this is the cartouche of what is called the Fry-Jefferson map, printed in 1754. Tobacco spilling out of the hogshead. This cartouche is an advertisement for everybody back in England. Come to Virginia, where you too, lazy white man, can sit in a chair while a slave brings you a glass of wine and your attenders are hanging on, telling you how great you are, while all these other slaves are working to load all of your tobacco into a ship to be sent to England. Come live the good life in Virginia, where again you can get rich thanks to tobacco and the labor of enslaved humans. Tobacco is hard work. It is very labor intensive, it is draining to the soil, and it is going to be 13 months before you see a profit between when the seeds are sown in February to when they are harvested sometime in September or October, prized, and that's what they're doing here. It's called prizing, or pretty much packing the tobacco into these hogsheads, or what these large barrels are called. The hogsheads are then rolled to a tobacco inspection warehouse. In 1730, Fredericksburg got a tobacco inspection warehouse. Falmouth got one as well. These are the westernmost tobacco inspection warehouses on the Rappahannock River. And that's what helps Fredericksburg to grow to be a prosperous community. You'd have to roll your hogsheads full of tobacco to an inspection warehouse where they would be checked out and put onto a ship and sent to market, usually in England. This is a picture of Norfolk, sometime in the early 1800s, painted by Latrobe. The largest city in Virginia, population of about 6,000. When you bring your tobacco to the warehouse to have it inspected, the inspectors, there's two of them, they're going to look it over, they're going to make sure you don't have any stems in there, you don't have any rubbish, you didn't pack a bunch of rocks and dirt in just to try to take up space. Mary Ball, Washington, she has some trouble in the 1740s, 1750s. She is accused of putting in some stems, seconds, tobacco of lesser quality. They passed this Tobacco Inspection Act because it's not getting as good of a price as it should in England. Too many people are sending rubbish tobacco to England. It's driving the price down. The House of Burgesses steps in and they say, we are going to tighten this ship up. They hire a bunch of tobacco inspectors to work all over the colony. They put very heavy fines on them if they get involved with any kind of chicanery or nincompoopery. They're going to be in so much trouble. The prices increase. In 1735, 40% of the Burgesses, many of whom had voted for this Inspection Act, they lose their jobs because a lot of the tobacco growers, they aren't happy with this government regulation. Some things don't change. When you take your tobacco to the warehouse and it is inspected, it will be appraised and you'll be given either a crop note. If you brought an entire hogshead full of tobacco, you would get one of these notes. It would have the mark on it. Everyone gets their own mark, kind of like a cattle brand. The barrel gets a number, weights on the barrel. Or if you don't have enough tobacco to fill a hogshead on your own, you could take it to a merchant, like Fielding Lewis. And he would say, I'll take your tobacco, I'm going to give you this much money for it, and I'll put your tobacco in with your tobacco, and we'll make one hogshead that way. Will you get a better price if you send your own tobacco full to England? Maybe. That's the verity of the market. But you'll get cash up front, or more likely, credit, if you just have a crop note. And here, looking again at William Ramsay's accounts books, specifically in this section, here are all of the debits, and in the credits, you can see where Mr. Ramsay has accepted from Mr. Wade 5 hogsheads of tobacco. They've gone straight to him. Yes?
This is going to sound like a strange question, other than the fact I grew up on a farm. How much could you get in? Like, how many acres, or an acre, a half acre into?
Right. It would depend on the growing season. The hogshead itself, the average weight of tobacco you could pack into it would be somewhere usually between 800 and 1,100 pounds. That's weight, not value sterling. The amount of money you might get for selling that hogshead of tobacco, half a ton of tobacco, 10 pounds sterling, give or take. The tobacco put onto the ships. Fielding Lewis, he'll be happy to sell some of your tobacco where it will be sold at market in England. And I say at market, really it might happen at a coffee house. These coffee houses in London, in Liverpool, in Glasgow, they become economic hubs. If you've ever heard of Lloyd's of London, that was a coffee house where merchants who would practice insuring ship voyages would get together. There was the Virginia Coffee House in London. That's where a bunch of guys who traded in Virginia tobacco would get together and drink coffee. Tobacco then is going to be repackaged after it's sold. It's going to get these different wrappers, again, selling you different images about the quality and the luxurious mouthfeel of the tobacco, how the smoke would be, or the chewing tobacco. And then your factor, working on your behalf in England, he's going to write you a letter back, hey, congratulations, we sold your hogsheads of tobacco, we got this much money, you still owe me this much money for all of the stuff I sent you last year. Congratulations. And that gets to be the problem. John Page down at Roswell, each year he's writing letters to his factor in England saying, I don't know why my crop didn't do so well. I'm sure it'll do better next year. Please send me more stuff. Just charge it to my account. And these London factors, look at this guy. He's in his banyan while everyone else is doing work, getting rich off of Fielding Lewis and John Page and everybody else here in Virginia. Our next form of economy that we're going to talk about would be credit. If you don't have enough money in hand, if you don't have the liquidity in the economy that you need, credit is going to be where you're going to make up that difference. This is a bill of exchange. It's pretty much a note that might come from somebody like Fielding Lewis to say, you know what, I am going to loan you £5. We'll establish a rate of credit. You'll have to pay me back eventually. I'm going to keep the stub, just like we did with the Treasury Notes. Once it's paid off, we can exit out. You might print up 3 of these if we were going to have this transaction take place across the Atlantic. Then we would put one version of the same bill of exchange, 3 versions of the same bill of exchange on 3 different ships, send them off to England. The first one that gets there, that's the one that we pay. The others we'll destroy when they arrive. So that's how our transatlantic trade and economy is going to be fulfilled. You could also have a letter of credit just in person. If I'm going to travel to visit Philadelphia and I don't know anybody there, I might have Fielding Lewis write me a letter of credit that I could take to a merchant that he knows in Philadelphia. And I could present that letter to that merchant and he'll say, oh yes, I know Mr. Lewis, here you go, here's the money you need, or I'll extend you credit in my store, feel free to spread my name around Philadelphia. If I don't pay back that money, that debt that I charge up in Philadelphia, who has to pay it for me? Fielding Lewis, he wrote me the letter of credit. And of course, with credit, there must be interest. Albert Einstein said the most powerful force known to man is compound interest. And it piles up, usually at 5% each year. Compound interest. And with credit, just like today, if you don't pay, you're going to wind up going to court. It is no infrequent occasion for somebody to get sued and to have to go to court to settle debt. In Williamsburg, Benjamin Powell had to sue his own daughter to get her out of the house after his son-in-law died. Because of a legal mechanism, he had to buy the house to settle his son-in-law's accounts, and then he gave the house back to his daughter. But he had to sue her in court to legally make that transaction happen. Fielding Lewis's son, Fielding Jr., he winds up in debtor's prison several times in his life. And again, this is all the colonial economy. Once we get into the war, everything changes. We saw on those paper treasury notes the value of the money, the face value of the money, it skyrockets. It absolutely tanks the economy in Virginia. This is a print called The Bostonians in Distress. They're all up here in this cage and being assisted by the other colonies, passing fish up to them. And this Bostonian is pushing out a bundle of papers that says promises. Just please let us out. I promise. We'll be good. While they're encircled by all of the artillery and soldiers down here, ships blockading the port. A rather favorable view as opposed to this one, where these different ministers, Lord North, the King's first minister, who we think of as the Prime Minister, are pretty much raping America, pouring the bitter draft, pouring tea down the throat. Before the Revolution, the American colonies are often represented by an American Indian female. Here you see Britannia, the female representation of England, standing by, ashamed at what's happening. Here's a Spaniard and a Frenchman, look at that nose, looking on, saying, wow, England really has some problems happening. And then here's this Scotsman in his kilt with a sword that says military law. He's the muscle that's going to enforce things as the economic system and the political system begin to deteriorate. And then finally, bringing it back here to Virginia again, this is a print entitled The Alternative of Williamsburg. Merchants were pretty much rounded up at the exchange one time down in Williamsburg by a couple of rabble-rousers, and they were forced to sign an association or a contract that says, I will not import any goods from England. If I do, I know I can expect a visit from the Committee of Safety. And they're going to probably threaten me with tar and feathers and all of these clubs that they're carrying. And this little boy who has a flag that says Liberty, that he's shoving it up the backside of this poor merchant. So that's my talk about the economy of colonial Virginia. I'll be happy to go back and address any other slides or answer any questions. Yes, sir.
When did banking start to make an impact in the economy?
England prohibited the colonies from setting up banks. They didn't want us to have that independence from their economic system. So really, almost immediately, 1775, the war starts, we begin to set up your own banks. One of the first, they had the James River Bank here in Virginia, was set up down near Williamsburg.
One of the species you didn't talk about was checks, the letters of credit.
Right.
Which typically comes out of a bank. Guy puts a lot of money in there and he walks around with a check.
Previously to banks being set up here in Virginia, you could get a bill of exchange. This would be a form of a letter of credit coming from a wealthy planter, coming from a merchant, somebody that has liquidity to spare. They would be able to extend that service. So that form of modern credit that you get from a bank, it's being addressed individually in colonial America. Again, this one drawn up as a bill of exchange from a merchant. Here, a less formal version of
They
that
didn't
bill
really
of
have any
bill of
place for
exchange.
the common person to come in and put money and then get what we call today a check and be able to walk around with it.
Not in the way that we would think of it today. Back then, really, and for larger transactions today, you're going to have some kind of collateral. And for a lot of people, this level of sophistication in the economy, it's just above them. My father-in-law, he finances commercial real estate in Manhattan. That is so far above my understanding of the economy. I have no idea how it works. The same would be true in the 18th century. For some people, there are financial mechanisms that are just so far above their station in life that they wouldn't have any understanding or use of it. Any other questions?
It's not a question, but this morning I went to South Riding, Virginia, and there was I was navigating, used my GPS, and there was a street called Spanish Dollar.
Oh yeah.
And that was the first time I ever heard of that, and I thought, that's a weird name. and now I know how that happened.
Yeah, it comes from that coin, that the most commonly circulated coin in colonial America was a Spanish coin, or at least I should say a coin of Spanish origin. Once it winds up in the Virginia economy and it gets passed around, it becomes a Virginia coin or a Massachusetts coin at that point. Doesn't really matter what's on the face of it by then.
Do they still sell tobacco or bound tobacco and refer to as hogshead of tobacco?
No, it's going to be packed in bales today. The hogshead, as a shipping container, the hogshead or any barrel makes sense because it's easy for a person to roll it. Or a great big hogshead, I can hook it up to a team of oxen and roll that down the road. As a shipping container taking up space, it's very inefficient because it's round. You put it up against another round object and there's a lot of air. There's a lot of lost space. When you ship tobacco or anything in the 18th century, you're going to be charged by weight, not by volume. No, I'm sorry, I'm backwards on that. You're going to be charged by volume, not by weight. So you can make the thing as heavy as you want. It's how much space is it going to take up in the ship. That's the problem. Today, most of the time, it's the opposite. You can ship like kind of bulky items sometimes as long as they don't weigh very much. That's not a problem. If we can fit it on in the airplane, we can fly it out somewhere for you. Any other questions? Yes?
One of your first slides, you mentioned a man named Carter, what did you say, Burr? Is it Burwell?
Burwell Carter.
Carter Burwell.
Yes.
Carter Burwell, yeah, he was a plantation owner over in Gloucester County, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I want to go back to the lady's statement about the acreage and how much acreage it would take to raise a tobacco crop. Since you left out a whole step about the drying process.
Right.
Which meant that you could pack more tobacco into these hogsheads.
Well, the drying process actually wasn't to pack in more. It was part of the seasoning. They wanted it to develop a sweeter aroma and flavor. So that's the reason that they would dry the tobacco before they prize it. And that prizing process, again, that's packing it into the hogsheads. As far as how much you could grow, it really would depend on the quality of your soil. It would depend on the type of tobacco you're growing. Are you growing the sweet-scented tobacco, which commands a higher price in the market, or are you growing the Orinoco tobacco, which will grow just about anywhere in Virginia? We're kind of on the perimeter of where you're going to be able to get that sweet-scented tobacco to grow. Really, it does well down on the James River, on the York River. It's a little iffy by the time you get up here onto the Rappahannock. So you're probably going to wind up having to grow the Orinoco, which mostly is going to be ground into snuff instead and then sent to the European continent. The sweet-scented, that's the good smoking tobacco. That's what will hit the market in England or be sent back to the colonies, to us at a premium. Certainly.
When the United States was created, why didn't they go to a dollar system rather than just continue the British pound system by using American pounds?
Really, it was because of the nomenclature of that commonly circulated coin, the dollar. Also, it is a simpler system. The dollar is a decimal system. There are 100 pennies in $1. Do you know when England stopped using pound, shilling, pence when they decimalized their currency? 1971. Holy smokes! How did they survive? How did they ever lose the empire? I have no idea. Everyone sat around having to figure out pounds, shillings, and pence all day. So really, it was because of the abundance of dollar coins and the idea that, you know, this exists and it's a simpler system for everybody to get a handle on.
Can anybody raise tobacco today, or do you still have to have a special permit to raise tobacco?
Oh, you didn't need to have a permit back then either to grow tobacco. You did have to take your crop to the tobacco warehouse, though. It had to go through that government inspection process. But anybody could grow tobacco. You'll frequently see there might be a little old widow who's got 10 acres that was left her by her late husband, and she rents it out and lets somebody grow tobacco on it, and she keeps 5 acres of it for herself, and that's what she'll bring to Fielding Lewis and say, hey, you know, what will you give me for this? And a couple of pounds, I'll throw it into this hogshead of other mixed tobacco as well. So it can be everything from, you know, that widow growing tobacco on just a couple of acres right up to hundreds and hundreds of hogsheads being produced. Yes?
Tobacco depletes the land, so how long can you grow tobacco year after year on one piece of land before it's depleted?
It varies on the quality of the soil. Some tobacco, it really likes this loose, sandy soil that you have down here in the lower tidewater. The Orinoco, it does a little better if you put some clay in with the soil. The rate at which it is depleted, though, it's going to depend on, are you practicing crop rotation? Are you using any fertilizer to try to put nutrients back into the soil? It does deplete the soil pretty quickly, though. Within 10 years, you're going to see a pretty rubbish crop of tobacco if you are not practicing any good practices of agricultural rotation or fertilization, which is why we are always trying to move further west. They're always trying to gobble up land down here in this part of Virginia, move west of the Alleghenies. It's one of the reasons that the Proclamation Line in 1763, when the King of England says, I don't want any of my subjects to move west of these mountains here. These wars with the Indians are too expensive, so you all can just stay east where you've already burned out all of the land on tobacco, and you're still getting all of these people moving in.
What do you call that line?
The Proclamation Line. In 1763, the king decreed by proclamation no settlement west of the Allegheny Mountains. So colloquially, it is referred to as the Proclamation Line. Thank you all very much.